She took our baby boy with a single gunshot through his heart. She shattered mine.
An emotional day in court for the mother of Daunte Wright as former Brooklyn Center police officer Kim Potter learned her fate. She has been sentenced to 24 months, but will serve 16 in prison for the murder of Daunte Wright.
And happy Saturday and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. I'm laughing already. It's February 19th, 2022. It's Saturday afternoon, and we're getting video and stuff right up to the moment that we're taping today. And the reason why I'm laughing is because I wore my favorite shirt, because you can't always blame Canada. And right before we came on, Val made me laugh because he said how appropriate my shirt was for today. And we'll explain that later. Without further ado, let me go ahead and get Val in here so I can get myself together and quit laughing. Val, welcome back to The Deal.
Thank you, Ed. Glad to be back, man. It's a lot to talk about and a short time to do it. So I'm going to give you a little reprieve, and you don't have to explain Canada right now. So we can just run right through to the show this morning.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Canada, but in the lead-in, Val, you saw a mother's anguish. Daunte Wright's mother, Kimberly Potter, was sentenced, and in the clip it said that she was sentenced to 24 months in prison, and will only have to serve 16. And you could hear the anguish in the mother's voice. And I got a clip in a little bit I want you to hear from the judge. But what's your visceral reaction to that sentencing? Because, according to Minnesota law, it should have been somewhere around 7 to 10 years, and it only came in at less than 2.
Well, it just shows you that judges are human, and they come in with preconceived notions of what fairness and justice happens to be. Not surprising that a officer of the court who happens to be a judge find themselves siding with law enforcement from time to time. That is their go-to, their default position. And I heard what's about to be played, what you're going to be playing about the judge's statement about Potter, saying something to the effect of, we have to look at this from the anguish and the disappointment and the problems of the defendant here. And I was basically saying, what about the family of the deceased? That never comes back. There is no justice here on that. And I was very disappointed that there are people in the jury system, criminal justice system right now, who are serving 10 plus years for nonviolent crimes, for theft, for drug use, for things of that nature. They're in jail for 10, 15, 20 years. And here's a person who took somebody's life, robbed that family of a family member, make a child grow up fatherless forever, and you give them 16 months in jail for that. That's a little hard to take.
It's extremely difficult to take, Val, because I also know that there are people in jail now who tried to register to vote, and they're in jail for 5, 6, 7 years in places like Texas. Let's go ahead and play that clip of the judge, because I do want to deal with this a little bit more. Here's the judge in the case.
Those who disagree and feel a longer prison sentence is appropriate, as difficult as it may be, please try to empathize with Ms. Potter's situation.
So Val, at one point she even broke up. She got choked up. She got really emotional about, Kimberly Potter's situation. I think you said it best right before we played the clip that, what about Daunte Wright's family? He ain't coming back. His child will never know him. His parents won't be able to spend any time. They won't ever have any grandchildren, or they might have grandchildren, but Daunte won't have anything to do with it, right? This is my problem here, Val. This particular judge in light of what has happened in Minneapolis and Minnesota and in Brooklyn Park, those communities have seen police officers do some pretty heinous things. And we talked about last week Amir Locke being basically killed when he got off the couch because he didn't know who was entering that on a no-knock warrant. I've spent a lot of time in Minnesota. I haven't had any personal issues, but what must you be thinking as a black person? I mean, I don't know if I want to live in Minnesota. I know I'm not asking a real question there, but what do you think about justice? I know they have a black attorney general, but for the state, but that doesn't extend to the judges, right? The judge showed what they are capable of doing.
These judges have too much power as far as issuing no-knock warrants are concerned. In my way of thinking, I can't justify any reason for a no-knock warrant. It started with a lot of superfluous stuff here on the East Coast, Ed, when at the height of the drug business in the 70s and 80s in New York City and places of that ilk. People were afraid, law enforcement folks were afraid they were going to flush evidence down the commode or throw it out the window, do something crazy, or escape out the back door if they knocked and identified themselves. That can't be the case in all situations that you need a no-knock warrant, bust the door down, and shoot anybody who doesn't comply. No consideration obviously has been given to people who are there and belong there and are legal. If I'm in my bed and I got a gun on my nightstand and somebody knocks my door down, why do you think I got the gun on the nightstand in the first place? To me, that's the bad guy. To me, if you're a good guy, you're going to say, police, Mr. Atkinson, are you there? Will you open the door, please? That gives me an opportunity to make a rational decision. But when the door is knocked off its hinges, to me, that's the bad guy. That's why I went and got a concealed carry permit. That's why I have a gun and have it loaded on my nightstand for situations just like that. And now a judge is saying, that's notwithstanding, go knock the door down. And if a guy reaches for a gun or whatever, it's all right to kill him. Don't worry about it. If he's innocent and hadn't done anything, you have permission to do that. I give you permission to no-knock, bust the door down, and kill anybody you want. I wonder how many times have no-knock warrants been issued in gated communities. I'd like to see the record for that.
Well, I think you know the answer to that one, Val. I did see a study, speaking of how many have been issued, and it talked about the disproportionate nature, obviously that they tend to affect African Americans first, then Latino Americans, and then everybody else except for white folks. And then I just wonder what this portends, though. So we have the verdict for Derek Chauvin on one hand, and everybody was applauding that, and it seems like the other officers in George Floyd's murder are going to have to pay a hefty price for it. But then you turn right around in the same community, nearly right, same prosecutors, a lot in most of the cases, and you see Kimberly Potter only getting 2 years, and then you see right now, I don't know if those officers in Minneapolis and St. Paul have been disciplined that were on that SWAT team for the no-knock warrant. I know they haven't been arrested. So that's more to come on that, Val, and we'll keep our eyes on that. Let's switch gears. It is Black History Month, and we've been a little bit remiss because there's been so much news going on. I do want to talk about Black History Month some in this segment. But something very disturbing that we've been seeing across the country. We already talked about the fact that, all these states are trying to pass legislation that prevent you from teaching anything at all, right? But there's also the problem of teachers who try to teach and screw the whole thing up. Let's take a look at a clip, and then we'll talk about it because it's shocking what they're talking about in this clip.
An Indiana school counselor tonight is getting some criticism online after a memo he sent to parents letting them opt their kids out of Black History Month lessons. That memo was posted to Twitter. Just the latest in kind of that social media firestorm over what's appropriate when teaching race in schools. You've got some teachers who say they're thinking about quitting because their states are restricting what they can teach, too. Our Maura Barrett has more on this one for us tonight.
Outrage over a teacher in Massachusetts making toddlers wear blackface masks. And parents in Indiana upset after they say a teacher had students draw black people picking cotton.
Picking cotton was forced labor. It's not something it's not a part of our heritage. There's so many other things that could have been discussed. Inventors, business owners.
Just a few instances of questionable choices on how to teach about Black History Month in schools.
Racism has gone on far too long. We know it's not going to go anywhere. It does not belong in Lawrence Township schools.
So, Val, here's a teacher in Massachusetts and one in Indiana, and one teacher makes little black faces and puts on the toddlers for Black History Month. And then the other teacher tells the students that they need to draw pictures of African-American people in history, but all the people are picking cotton. What the hell, Val? So I guess on one hand, they acknowledge Black History Month, but on the other hand, what planet are they on to think that those two examples were somehow exemplar of accomplishments of black folks? What are we looking at here?
Well, you got to go back to the number one question we ask all the time, Ed. Something that Martin Luther King alluded to. He asked the question, are we integrating ourselves into a burning house? And he meant a lot by that. Folks need to stop and think and assess. How far are we away from what we are fighting for? Real justice and freedom, a real multiracial democracy, financial fairness, all of those things that we think America pretends to stand for, but are a long ways off. And we have to ask ourselves, how far are we away from that? Are we talking 200 years, 250? How far are we away from that? How much longer do we go? And the main question, Ed, is, and I want to pose this to our listening audience, is white America ready for a multiracial democracy? That is the overarching question that should override everything else. Whenever you bring up all of these issues about sentencing and you talk about fairness and justice and voter suppression and all of the like, go back to that question first. And you got to ask yourself, do you really think the majority of white folks in America are really ready for and desire a multiracial democracy? I think it's rhetorical. I think it was rhetorical when Dr. King posed that question. I think he knew the answer. But we need to force ourselves to come face to face with the reality of the answer to that question, because the answer to that question will determine our path from here forward. Because if you tell me that you as a white person, Ed, are not ready for, and you don't think it's the best in the best interest of America that we have a multiracial democracy, because you don't think that non-white people are ready to run this country in a way that it has become accustomed to being run and to keep its status in the world. So you ain't ready for that yet. And maybe in another 100 or 150 years, that may be the case. If you tell me that, that should really determine what my next moves are. Yeah. What my position is on a lot of things. Because, you know, it's no need trying to put out the fire underneath the kitchen table and around the front door when everything in the cellar, in the basement, and in the attic is on fire. Right, yeah.
Wow.
It don't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at that point. That's a very apt analogy, Val. One other thing that before we run out of time in this segment, I want to talk about. I didn't talk to you about this in our prep this week, but because I just ran into it only about 30 minutes before we started recording today. And today is the 100th anniversary of the Mississippi Senate voting 25-9 to ban all black people from the state of Mississippi. And that is real. That's a real fact of history. And on this day, February 19th, 1922, the legislature of Mississippi, the Senate, voted 25-9 to ban all black people from the state of Mississippi, and they didn't care where they went. They wanted you to get out, and it wasn't just one county. It just wasn't one city. The whole damn state of Mississippi. And Val, in light of that kind of history in America, and this, I want you to put your history professor hat on for a second, and also think about when you were teaching students. That history, that's a fact of history, right? And based on the legislation that we've seen, do you think something like that could ever be taught in the state of Mississippi? Is that just going to be lost to history? But it's a real fact.
Oh, it's a real fact. And there are others that go along with that to make it even more recent. The top one that comes in my mind as you bring up data like that, Ed, is the year 2003, which is a little bit more recent. 2003 is the year that the state of Mississippi finally ratified the 13th Amendment. Let's go back a little bit. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. And we needed 75%, if you want right now, we need 75% of all of the states to agree to add any amendment to the Constitution. But we don't need all of them, it's not 100%. So we had enough back on December the 6th of 1865 to ratify the 13th Amendment and get it on the books. But we didn't have all of them. Mississippi was one of those states that didn't come around. And they came around slowly but surely, some 10 years later, some 80 years later, 100 years later. Mississippi, 2003. 2003, they said, we agree that slavery should be abolished in the United States of America.
That is an astonishing fact, Val. So you trumped me on that one because I forgot all about that. So, man, on that note, I think it's time to take a break because I'm going to have to go get some water because if you don't realize how important those two things that Val and I just talked about are, we're in a whole bunch of trouble. So anyway, stay right there. We'll be right back after this message. And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We had a very lively discussion at the beginning of the show. One very, important thing happened on Friday. Yesterday, Kim Potter was sentenced, but she only got 2 years for murdering, and I do say murder, Dante Wright. And we'll see what the outcome of that's going to be, Val. And we also talked about Black History Month, the trouble with teaching Black history and also some historical facts that go unnoticed. And we think we know the reason why. We think that it's because people are afraid to tell the truth, and also afraid that they may have to relinquish power. But be that as it may, let's go on to some international news. Our friends up north, the Canadians, and you see, like I said, I got on my shirt because you can't always blame Canada. The Canadians decided to take matters into their own hands and end the convoy that we talked about last week. So let's look at a clip, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
The terms of the standoff have been set, and with the potential power of overwhelming force, it now appears to be just a question of time.
We're not going anywhere.
Well, some are. Dozens of arrests, often for mischief, a criminal charge with a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. While everyone here could now be arrested, police started at the top of the organization, arresting the protest leadership. Western separatist Tamara Leach.
Back up, please. Just back up, guys.
Saskatchewan trucker Chris Barber, each charged with counseling others to commit mischief.
Maybe we should go around that way.
Daniel Bulford, until months ago a police officer himself who left his job in the Prime Minister's RCMP security detail after refusing vaccination.
What's that?
You're under arrest, sir.
For what?
Finally, Pat King, a white nationalist and conspiracy theory peddler, revered among supporters on social media.
Could you please step out of the vehicle, sir?
I'd like to get my lawyer on the phone right away.
The arrested must appear before court within 24 hours, which would decide whether to release them at all. If they are, the court is likely to want reassurance they won't return.
Val, the Canadians are not Americans. They don't have a constitution like we have. They do have a constitution, but it's not our constitution. And some folks went up to Canada, and some of them were Canadian, and some of them were Americans who were supporting these Canadians, who tried to skirt the Canadian rule that says truckers have to be vaccinated. And so they started blocking first the bridge that led from Michigan to Canada. And then once that was cleared up, they kept blocking the streets in Ottawa. And then the premier of the province of Ontario and also the Canadian Prime Minister said, enough is enough. You got to move. They used something called the Emergencies Act, which we don't have here. And under the Emergency Act, the premier of the province can say, I declare an emergency. These are the terms, and this is how long you got. And if you don't disperse, you'll be charged with criminal mischief, which is, in Canadian terms, up to 10-year sentence. So, Val, I refuse to play any of the people over at Fox News who were trying to gin this up as a real news story. But explain to me how this became a story of the right and what were they trying to do with this. I have my opinions, but I'll let you talk about it a little bit. So first, what do you think about what the premier and the prime minister did by clearing these people out? And then two, what was the American right trying to do with this story?
Well, the premier was absolutely correct. That needed to stop, not only for financial reasons, but for political reasons. There were some people at Fox News and on the alt-right who decided that they were going to try to catch a spark north of the border to help out in their ultra-conservative right-wing agenda that they've been brewing here in the United States called Trumpism. That didn't work either. And calmer and cooler and more sane heads prevailed, and they stopped this nonsense. They stopped it in its track and cleared it out. And I wish we had laws similar to the one that were invoked in Canada, where we could say, hey, cut it out, or that's it, to stop all of the nonsense. But be that as it may, it's still good that we have the First Amendment that stops a lot of these kinds of things and allows a lot of these things that are important. But we are we're blessed, I can say, that things have turned out the way they have. Hopefully things can get back to the way they were before this came as a story for Fox News. You can tell, Ed, that they think it's over too, because you don't see them advertising those kind of things anymore. And that's not the main thing. Right now they're talking about Ukraine, and they're talking about voter suppression, and they still talk about their baby, the 2020 election that was ostensibly stolen. But they've gotten off this trucker piece, so maybe we can put that to bed as well.
Well, they're going to try to. They tried to play it as long as they could, and what was shocking to me, Val, is that when I was reading some of the comments, because I tell you I do this so other people don't have to. I spent a lot of time on the Fox website, also reading the tweets from people like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and all those clowns, and they kept trying to frame this as if this had to do with the American Constitution. And they also tried to say that this was the largest protest in Canadian history, when in fact about 100 people were out there at the most times. Even though they were causing a lot of problems, it wasn't widespread like they expected. And then as they were arresting people in the footage, you could, everybody was not happy that the protest had gone on. And they were giving the protesters the middle finger and telling them to get out of town. And then I guess the last part of this is, this is for the Canadians to decide. And it's clear that the Canadian on the federal level and on the provincial level and even on the city level had decided enough was enough. Now, it's ironic to me that this very same right-wing folks here in the United States who, when they said there was enough of the protests for over George Floyd's murder or whatever, they were wanting to arrest people and knock people upside the head and bring in armored tanks to break it up over something very legitimate, right? But of course, Negroes were involved, so they have a different take on things. So I'll leave it at that. So in honor of Canada, we can't always blame Canada. They did the right thing this time to move these clowns along. Let's head over across the pond, Val, across the Atlantic, over to Europe, and let's talk about Ukraine. Right before we started taping, again, we try to be as timely as possible on this program. We were looking at video. Kamala Harris was in Berlin at Berlin Security Conference, giving remarks about the U.S. position on Ukraine. Let's take a look at that, and then we'll talk about it.
Commitment to a set of defining principles. The United States is equally committed to these principles. That people have a right to choose their own form of government. That nations have a right to choose their own alliances. That there are inalienable rights which governments must protect. That the rule of law should be cherished, that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states must be respected, and that national borders should not be changed by force.
So, Val, Kamala Harris was basically just reiterating the Biden administration's position that action will be taken if Russia does an invasion, and it looks to be imminent, right? Now, there's not just 100,000 troops. There's estimates of 160,000 troops. There's already been some action across the border in Donbass, which is a part of Ukraine, where there have been some actual shooting, and a kindergarten was blown up earlier this week. What is your take on the Biden administration's position that we're going to take measures against Putin, but we won't put troops in Ukraine? How do you do that effectively? I mean, diplomacy is one thing, but you can't threaten anybody, I guess, if, so what's Putin going to Is he going to be really afraid of what Biden is saying?
This is by far, in my opinion, the worst situation that Biden has been in his presidency. It's almost a lose-lose situation. He's in a situation where he can't afford to look weak by allowing Putin to invade Ukraine and do absolutely nothing about it. He definitely can't afford to start World War III. It's all over for the planet if that happens. So I don't see how he gets out of this. He's hoping that Putin will have an epiphany of something and say, okay, I was just kidding, guys. I'm pulling all my troops back, and let's see if we can talk and make sure this doesn't happen again. He's hoping against hope something like that happens. That's what you call hopelessness, when in order for you to win, somebody else has to do something, but you have no control over whether they do it or not. That is hopelessness, guys. And that's where Biden finds himself now. That's the only win he's got, is something that Putin's got to do, which Biden cannot control that. The last little piece that really made Biden kind of flinch a little bit, Putin has said that, in other words, and I paraphrase here, that the West should not think that they are the only ones that can levy sanctions. That there are some sanctions that Russia and its allies could levy that would make life as miserable in the West as the West is trying to make life miserable in Russia. And when he said allies, he was talking about China as well. So Russia and China together, with all of the things that they do, it's just unfathomable to think about. One, and I'll just end it by saying this. He mentioned that if you take a look at all of the and you know about this, is your field, Ed, the semiconductors that are manufactured around the world, 70% of them are done outside the West. And so if that supply line dries up, it's unfathomable what that does to our economy, our systems, our everything.
Yeah. I can tell you, Val, you mentioned my day job. I work in technology, and there have been supply chain shortages that affected auto manufacturing, but also the internet. I mean, no new equipment was going out for the last year and a half. And so technology-wise, security-wise, we're well behind because of that. In addition to that, speaking of security, on the internet over the last few days has been a plethora of activity, hacking attempts into Ukraine, and more than likely from Russia, and maybe even from China, but more than likely from Russia. So we've been seeing that. There's one other last thing I do want to talk about related to Ukraine before we run out of time in this segment is whether or not the U.S. is telling the truth or whether Russia's telling the truth. Here's a clip, and then we'll talk about it.
It's often said that the first casualty of war is the truth. With tensions running high over a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine, all sides have accused each other of spreading misinformation and propaganda. Here are some examples. The separatist leaders of the Donbass region ordered mass evacuations to southern Russia. They say the Ukrainian military is preparing to move into the area. Kiev denies this, and the U.S. calls the evacuation operation a false flag operation by Russia to justify military action. Moscow has long said Ukraine is threatening Russian speakers, even accusing Kiev of genocide.
Allow me to add that in our assessment, what's happening now in the Donbass constitutes genocide.
The U.S. called the genocide claim a reprehensible falsehood. The State Department says Russia is behind a huge disinformation campaign, but Washington has faced criticism as well. The U.S. says Moscow could invade at any moment. Joe Biden repeated the warning despite Ukraine's president saying such information is sowing unnecessary fear.
We have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days. We believe that they will target Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, a city of 2.8 million innocent people.
So, Val, you know, what we do here is we go and look at other news sources. I wasn't going to go just to U.S. news. I went to Al Jazeera, right? And Al Jazeera, I figured, would be sort of a midway between, you know, the two sides here in this case. And on this Al Jazeera program I was watching earlier today, the question was, is the United States making up stuff about the false flag, or is the false flag that the Russians are doing is made up to, you know, influence people to their side? I guess I'll ask you. We've been around long enough, but we both know that the United States doesn't have clean hands, but neither does the Russians. Does it really matter in this case? Are we just at the point where we need to bring the temperature down to save humanity? Right? Does it just come down to that, or do we really want to get to who's telling the truth or not?
Well, let me take your first one about bringing the temperature down to save humanity. It is so unfortunate that we've come to the place in our existence, our meaning the United States of America, that our position in the world, being number one, being the untold ruler, is more important than anything else. You know, we can't afford to have that tarnished. And so we'll do and say about just about anything to keep people from thinking that we are losing our place atop the mountain. And that's scary, because I'm afraid that there is no place we won't go in protection of that reputation of that place on the mountain. And Putin is testing us on that. He's pushing Ukraine. It reminds me, Ed, the same way Khrushchev pushed Cuba. It's the same thing. And what we're doing now here is hoping that Putin reacts the same way that Khrushchev did. And there was some hanky-panky, there was some lying going on about that. The American intelligence community, along with the media, made it look as though Khrushchev blinked and he caved in and he took his missiles out from the middle of the sea, turned them around and took them back to Moscow. And we won. We called his bluff and we won. That's not the way it really turned out. You know, they got a conference and they said, why can't we have missiles in Cuba 90 miles away when you got missiles pointed down our throat, even shorter distances than 90 miles? So the agreement was that, okay, you take your missiles out of Europe, point it toward me, and I'll turn my missiles away, take them out of Cuba, point it toward you. How about that? So that's what they agreed to, but that ain't the story you heard. You heard that Khrushchev blinked, because we all have always been about the business of having to win and looking good in the eyes of the global public. And that's where we find ourselves today. Only you're dealing with a guy who some people don't know if Putin is a master chess whiz or a dynamite poker player. And that's a hell of a combination to have there. So I'm scared. I don't know what he's doing. And the bigger problem is, I don't know if anybody in Biden's circle knows either.
Yeah. Well, that's the trouble with this whole thing. I don't think anybody knows. Putin is an interesting character. He's been around a long time. The Russian people are sort of have kind of been reduced in stature, Val. You know, Russia is not as important as before. There is no Soviet bloc, right? The Uzbekistans and Kazakhstans and all those stands, and including Ukraine and Latvia and all those other places, aren't in that Russian orbit anymore. So that puts them in a very, different position. They're not the king of the roost, right? And then their population is still shrinking. They're down to 140 million people, which is a lot of people, but countries like Indonesia have more people than, and Brazil have as many or more people than Russia. and they don't have a whole lot going for them. So I think their back is against the wall. You know what, Val? I hear some music, so that means it's probably time to take a break. So when we come back, I want to wrap up with two things. I made a mistake and said the word Trump earlier. So you know what the rule is. We got to play a clip about Donald Trump. So we'll do that when we get back. And then we also want to wrap up with Omicron and COVID and where we're headed down the road with both of those things. We'll be right back after this message.
I trust the vaccines. I trust the scientists who have come up with a great formula to help defeat COVID-19.
I'm very lucky because my wife and I were able to get the vaccine. If you have an opportunity to get the vaccine, please do it.
Get in the game, get off the sidelines, and get vaccinated. And so it's important for us to take the torch, be the example, and make sure we're doing our part to protect our community.
It's paramount that we all be vaccinated so we can protect each other, and especially our loved ones.
I believe in the vaccine. I believe in our scientists. I believe in the medicine. I took it to protect others and hopefully live longer.
We're gonna get through this thing. We gotta practice social distancing. We gotta wear our masks. You have a spot, take your shot.
You have a spot.
Take your shot.
You have a spot.
Take your shot.
You have a spot. Take your shot.
And welcome back to our final segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. It is Saturday, February 19th, 2022. We're so happy that you decided to come and join us. Make sure you drag some other people along. We try to make this topical, timely. We include discussions about the world, the nation, our culture as Black folks. We are unapologetically Black-centered in our conversations here because the last time I woke up, I was still colored. So I don't mind talking about issues that affect Black folk. And I'm also not afraid to say, Val, that I am to the left of politically, and I wish more people would just take that mantle and say that's who I am and not be afraid of it, because you can't beat back the right if you don't claim to be on the left, right? So anyway, so we've talked about a bunch of stuff. Kim Potter, we started talking about, we talked about Black History Month, we talked about Ukraine, and we talked about the nuts up in Canada that were blocking the bridge there that are now going to jail. And some of them may spend as much as 10 years in jail because Canada has different laws than the United States. This last segment, Val, like I said, I made a mistake. And I said Trump. I wasn't talking about Trump, but I said the word Trump. So according to the rules here of the deal, I got to play something about Donald Trump. So let's jump right into it. This is from a podcast. From a commentator that's often seen on in MSNBC. His name is Kirshner. He used to work in the Southern District of New York Prosecutor's Office, talking about folks that may have to testify.
This order was issued in a subpoena battle motion. New York State Attorney General Tish James subpoenaed Donald Trump, Don Jr., Ivanka to testify in connection with her civil fraud investigation of Trump and the Trump Organization. And of course, Trump and his children filed motions to quash. They said, we shouldn't be made to sit in a deposition. Friends, this 8-page order is unlike anything I ever saw as a prosecutor in my 30 years. And I saw a lot of judicial orders. This was as blunt and candid and direct and ominous for Trump and company as anything I've ever seen a judge put in writing.
Val. Now, I know that you know that I know that Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, always had them over a barrel. The Trump family, that is. And now a judge has stepped in and says, guess what? Don Jr., Ivanka, Eric, whoever, you need to give depositions in our investigation into whether or not you were lying about your assets and you were saying that stuff was more valuable than what it was. There may be some insurance fraud. And if you listen to Trump's former right-hand man who actually went to jail for him, he says that nothing in Trump's taxes are real. And you can tell us about Trump's accounting firm that says you no longer should believe anything that's in his tax returns or his accounting records. What does this mean? I still don't think that we'll ever see Donald Trump in an orange jumpsuit, no matter how much I want to see that. But does this put us in a different light because a judge has said that they need to go give depositions?
No, it does not. Simply because there's a thing called an appeal. And if it keeps going high enough, I think Trump and his minions think that the final arbiter of all appeals is on the side of Trump and whatever he believes in or doesn't believe in. So I don't put a lot of credence in that kind of stuff. It's about the old judicial system that we've always had here in America, Ed, where we get a preponderance of the evidence. The sane, rational people say, oh, I can't beat this. Let's make a deal. Give me the key. Let me inside. I'll lock myself in, throw the key back out. Let's go on with Americana. Trump has figured out long ago that nobody has really tested America and its judicial system or its legal system or whatever, that when the guy says no, these guys don't know what to do. Because they think that way you do it, you keep talking about it, get the media involved, get everybody else involved, saying, oh, this is terrible. Look what he just did. Oh, did you hear about that? Look at that. And then the guy just, okay, you got me. But what happens if they never say, okay, you got me? And they got some people back in the appeal process that may back them up. Well, Trump has proven that we as a country don't know how to deal with people that don't cave in and say, yeah, you got me, I'm wrong, I surrender. Because we've never had to. When's the last time we had to wrangle about putting a chief executive behind bars? Hell, Abraham Lincoln didn't even want anything bad to happen to Jeff Davis. And he has sworn the death of America. He had killed 400,000 or 500,000 Americans and that sort of thing. We don't have a record of doing that. We don't have a record of doing anything. You can talk about Richard Nixon all you want to, but he committed Harry. He did that himself. He resigned. We didn't go get him. Show me one record of somebody who we went and got. Even his little boy, Spiro Agnew, pleaded no contender. He quit. Show me somebody that didn't quit, that stood up and fought against the United States of America, that we went and got him and we won from the other side.
Well, you're right. Trump knows how to run on that treadmill and to run out the time. You know, you alluded to one thing in your comments that, you know, Trump has appeals and those kind of things on his side. And it was one thing I was remiss to mention, that they're still in the throes of trying to determine who the nominee is going to be for Supreme Court. And I do want to make sure we talk about that a little bit. Michelle Childs appears to be the number one contender for that position. Let's play a little bit of tape and then we'll talk about it.
South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn.
I just think that it is time for us to diversify the court, not just as relates to gender, but as it relates to color as well, and as it relates to backgrounds and experiences.
In any case, Judge Childs should be ready for a promotion. She was nominated to the Court of Appeals last year. Confirmation is expected if she isn't nominated to the Supreme Court instead.
So, Val, we've been talking about this now. We're going on week 3 now since Stephen Breyer announced his retirement. And in the clip there, that was Jim Clyburn talking about all the great things about Michelle Childs. And no doubt that she's probably qualified, right? the problem here is that there's been a little bit of sniping from some people on the left who have a problem because Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott from South Carolina are supportive of Michelle Childs. Is that problematic for Childs, or it doesn't matter at this point? That either way, if Childs is on the court, and it looks like she could be on the court fairly easily, that's not a problem because Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott are supporting her.
That's not a problem at all. I don't think, simply because you got Clyburn, who is supporting her, I believe, right now. And without Clyburn, Biden may not have a job right now. Other thing that you got to consider about the Senate rules, they have something called a blue card. And the blue card must be turned in, a card of acceptance, a card of agreement, must be turned in by both senators from the state that the nominee arises from. We had a nominee right here in North Carolina, James A. Wynn Jr., who was nominated by Bill Clinton, but kept off the bench by Jesse Helms, who refused to turn in his blue card or acquiesce. So Scott and Graham are getting ahead of the game. This is a verbal way of saying we're going to turn in our blue card, or we're not going to object to that if you decide to name her. But they want to get out in front of this and try to claim credit. We're saying that that's who we want. So if she does get the seat, we can say we had something to do with it or whatever. It's a little gamesmanship, but it's not all that it portends to be. And I think that Biden is in a win-win situation. We talked about him being in a lose-lose situation on Ukraine. I think he's in a win-win situation here with the nomination of an African-American female to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. So I don't see Scott and Graham's agreement and support of Childs being problematic at all for Joe Biden.
Yeah, at least I hope not. I mean, either way, whether it's Ketanji Brown or Michelle Childs or whoever emerges, it's going to be somebody who should be on the bench. It's just whether or not, we can get past this and move on. My problem is that it's still going to be a super majority for the right. I won't even call it the Republicans because I don't even know what that means anymore. For the right on the court is going to have that majority, and people like Clarence Thomas don't seem to be going anywhere. So that's problematic for people that are on the left like me. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Super Bowl real quick. Ended up being a decent game for what part of it that I saw. Halftime show was spectacular, was much praised by most folks. But there were some people from the right who complained and called it vulgar because there were girls with booty shorts on and it was too hippity hoppity for them or whatever. Then Eminem, the one lone white guy up there, he's the one that took a knee, which seems to be had been okay with the NFL. This is real quick, Val. What was the halftime show really? Was it some acquiescence from Goodell in the NFL for the way they treated Colin Kaepernick, but not far enough? I mean, we know that Jay-Z and some other folks have been working with Goodell to whatever they're supposed to be doing, right? And to me, I'm not real happy about the way they've gone about it. There's still no black owner in the NFL, so on and so forth. But what do you think the halftime show was about other than the music?
Well, it came from the notion that Roger Goodell, who's commissioner of NFL, went in some type of agreement with Jay-Z to help the NFL with their attempt to become more socialized when it comes to the entirety of its community that it's supposed to serve. They talk about the NFL social justice efforts, they call it a name. That's what Jay-Z was hired to do. And one of Jay-Z's conditions was that, okay, that's fine. I'll help you out. What I really want is the halftime show. And I personally don't know how Jay-Z felt that having the halftime show was going to do anything to help Colin Kaepernick. I don't know about that, but that's what Jay-Z wanted. And Goodell was pleased to give it to him. Because if that's all I need to give you for you to sign your name to say you are helping out in this social justice effort that we got, that's good. And I want to talk a little bit about Loretta Lynch before we go, because he did the same thing with her. But what Jay-Z did, he concocted a show in my mind that was sort of like an arrival, here we are, we did it, I am that I am show for hip hop. This showed the world that hip hop had made it, and it had arrived. It was a genre of music that everybody had to deal with. It was a culture that was owned by African Americans themselves without the help or acquiescence of white folks. The one thing that we got that we own, and makes a lot of people proud to do that. I mean, I know 45, 55, 60, 70-year-old men and women who, take a fealty oath to hip hop, and they're afraid to say anything about it bad. So it's big. It's big. It's grown bigger than anybody knows. But then there's still Colin Kaepernick. I'd hate to think that we have not only pushed him under the bus, but held him there and don't let him out so that hip hop can reign. That's not good. And we've got to think about, we got to go back to that. After we, buy all of the music we can buy for Jay-Z and Snoop and 50 Cent, he was there, and all of the other people, and Mary J. Blige, and all Eminem. After we do all of that, the issue that Colin Kaepernick kneel about is still there. What are we going to do about that?
Well, I'm glad you got to that point. What are we going to do about it? Because the other big story is coaching in the NFL. And guess who turns out to be on the legal team for the NFL? Our homegirl from Durham, North Carolina, Loretta Lynch.
How about that?
Explain that to me, Val. How did the NFL score that one?
She's black. I can explain it in 2 words. She's black. And they needed somebody. So they went to the law firm of Paul Weiss. Paul Weiss is a law firm that he deals in that kind of thing. He had a contract with McDonald's not too long ago, and some other people. They specialize in issues where African Americans or other people of color are filing class action suits against mega organizations for racially charged activities or behavior. And this is one of them, where Bryant Flores is filing a class action suit against discrimination in hiring. So they go out and get Paul Weiss's company, and he puts Loretta Lynch on it. Loretta Lynch, by the way, for people who've been living under law, served as the Attorney General of the United States of America under Barack Obama. So it's not just some lady from Durham, North Carolina, although we were real proud of that. So he's playing for the big bucks here. He's pulling out the stops to make it a big game here. So we got to watch this Brian Flores case. It's going to be very important.
Yeah, it's going to be very important. I was really disappointed when I saw the news that Loretta Lynch was going to be one of the lead attorneys for the NFL. But money talks, and what did I say? Bullshit walks, right? So the money. When you're at a firm like Weiss's firm, that's when you get in that $1,500 hour category of law and lawyering, right? It's not some poor country lawyer.
If you can afford $1,500 an hour, you're doing all right.
Yeah, it's not. You're not going to trade a chicken for to get you out of a speeding ticket. Let's put it that way. The last thing I want to talk about, Val, is we're in the throes of the coronavirus. A lot of people are pushing to get to an endemic state instead of pandemic. This is Dr. Fauci. Let's listen to him real quick, and then we'll wrap this up.
Let me begin by asking you where we are as a country with regard to COVID. There's a new modeling study out today that says something like 3/4 of the country is protected either by virtue of the vaccine or having been infected with COVID. And then you look at other statistics that say only about half of eligible Americans have been vaccinated and boosted. So if people want to understand how safe we should feel, are we overestimating that?
Well, I'm not so sure whether it's an over or underestimation, Judy. I think it's the reality that if you look at where we are right now, clearly there's a sharp decrement in the cases and in the hospitalizations, with a little bit less of a lagging or more of a lagging with deaths. But every day when you look at the data and you do weekly averages, you're seeing the cases and the hospitalizations go down. That's very good news. However, when you look at the CDC map of high and substantial activity, it's still really mostly red or orange, which means that it's right up there where a lot of activity. The good news, Judy, is that we're going in the right direction. There's no doubt about it. Now, getting to your original question, when you look at what people are referring to as the degree of immunity in the community, that means a combination of people who've been vaccinated as well as those who've been infected and recovered. The only confounding issue with that is the durability of protection. And when you have variants like Omicron, which can evade the immunity, the number of people who are so-called seropositive, which means they've either been infected or they've been vaccinated, sometimes can be misleading with regard to the vulnerability.
So, Val, Anthony Fauci says that, at least we're probably around 75-80% of people either vaccinated or have gotten the virus. So we're moving towards that when they kept talking about, herd immunity or whatever you want to call it, right? That we've gotten to a point where we can talk about taking off masks and going back to normal. But we heard that last year. And one of the things that happened was a new variant came along and then there was a spike. I can tell you, I'm very concerned that people let their guard down too soon. And now we're close to 1 million people dead. So talk to me real quick about what you think about what Dr. Fauci is saying now and your comfortability level with taking the mask off.
Well, I'm not comfortable at all, and I still wear mine. I don't even look for the signs on the door of the establishment that some of them say mask required, some of them don't. I don't care. I'll put mine on anyway. It's just a habit now, and I go and do that. And if I have a favorite restaurant that I go and eat at, I'll take it off to eat, of course, and then come back out. I'll social distance while I'm eating. I'll make sure I'm not right in the middle of a whole bunch of other people and those kinds of things. But I still practice what I preach, and social distancing, wearing of the mask, taking all of the shots that are available for me, and any new ones that come out, I'll do that. But to get to your question, Ed, I think Fauci is bowing a little bit to the pressure of the non-maskers, because the media is leading the way. I don't care if it's MSNBC or Fox. Every time Fauci is on the air, the questions come in the form of bombardments. Well, why this? And when are you going to do this? And why can't this happen this way? And they are all pushing him in this one little box to make him try to say that, okay, I guess it's all right if we allow parents to make the decision on their kids if they're under 12. And I guess it's okay that social distancing is not 6 feet anymore, but maybe 3. They're just pushing them to these things because you got this big group out there, Ed. I call it Americana group, who wants to get back to what makes it good to be in America. Walking down the street, letting your hair blow in the wind, showing your wonderful bright complexion and your nice shorts, and hugging people, and shaking hands, and that's Americana, man. That says to other people on the planet, I am proud to be an American. Don't you wish you were one too? Come walk with me down Fifth Avenue. All right. Let's go to Times Square, guys. Let's hang out, man. This is America. And COVID takes away all of that. That's why they hate it.
Yeah.
That's why they hate it.
Well, we spent some time in the second segment talking about Canada and how they approached it. I mean, but this is a pandemic. This is worldwide. This is not just United States. I mean, I hope people make the right decisions about this, Val. And like I said, we're probably over the million mark. I know the last number I saw was 900 and some thousand, but I'm pretty sure there's more than that. On a related note, the last time we were on, I mentioned that, someone I knew had passed from COVID again this past week, another person, another older person who had been vaccinated, but still just couldn't fight it off. And that's unfortunate. And I don't want to keep doing that every week, having to speak to that. But anyway, before we get out of here, we got to do like we always do. What do we got to look forward to, Val? What's coming up?
Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., we have another show called Connections on Foxy 107, 104, WFXC, WFXK, 107.1 and 104.3 FM on your FM dial if you have terrestrial radio. And we have a guest, Mr. Rod Jenkins, who is the Director of Health for Durham County, North Carolina. And of course, you, Ed, and Irv Jonah, our co-host and analyst, will be there with me to usher in another edition of Connection. So I invite and encourage everybody to tune in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Foxy 107 and 104.
Yeah, Rodney Jenkins with Durham County Health Department, because we're going to be talking about COVID, I suspect, because that's his job, to keep the people of Durham, North Carolina safe from COVID. Well, I hear that music again, so that means we got to get up out of here. I need for you guys to go out and do something good for somebody today. But in the meantime, also, again, tell people about the deal with edclark.com. Tell people about Connections on Foxy 107, 104. Tell people about Val Atkinson. Go look him up. He has some books he needs for you to buy so he can stay retired and doesn't have to get a job at Walmart. And all those things. So we'll be back here next Saturday with more on the deal. Have a great Saturday. Talk to you later. Bye.